1892. Amid the growth of the New South's industrial boom, an innovative South Carolinian named W.B. Smith Whaley settles in Columbia. In 5 years, he builds 4 mills: the Granby along Hayward Street, the Richland on Main, the Capital City along Assembly, and finally his grandest, the Olympia. When the Olympia came online in 1900, it was the largest textile mill in the world under one roof. 1,200 people, mostly former sharecroppers, many of whom could not read or write, flocked to Columbia. They were attracted by the prospect of a life in Olympia's Mill Village, the largest in the area, boasting 350 houses with 5 different floor plans. Today, the Olympia Mill Village Museum complex depicts the lives of those early textile laborers and their descendants. They had created a thriving community that maintains its roots more than 120 years later. I'm Dondi Mercer-Plank. Today, we are exploring the Old Mill Schoolhouse and taking a trip through the decades. Work within the Olympia was a family affair. Because children worked to help run their family farm, it was not a stretch for mill workers to have their children go work alongside them. Children as young as 7, albeit at greatly reduced wages, contributed to family incomes, and parents were able to keep an eye on the children while working. As the population of poor textile workers began to grow in Columbia, the area's longtime residents began to be concerned about uneducated mill workers who were coming to live and populate the city. The townspeople implored Mr. Whaley to remove children from the mill's dangerous working conditions and to provide an education. Those already in the area also did not want what were viewed as dirty mill children in their schools. Mr. Whaley hired a young teacher, Miss Mamie Boozer, to canvass the mill village and urge parents to forego their children's mill income for a chance at an education. Enough parents were convinced, and the Olympia Mill School opened October 1st, 1901, with about 30 students. The school was located in a mill house at the end of the mill village. It now is where the Olympia Mill Village Museum is located. Getting an education was a privilege, and more families began to send their children to school. By 1904, there were 120 students. By 1909, 240, all attending this small school in different shifts. That spurred Richland County to build the first brick Olympia School, still located right next door to the Mill Schoolhouse. Olympia School has remained a touchstone for this community throughout the decades, and it continues to be an important landmark in Richland County. By the 1920s, many towns in South Carolina had textile mills, but Olympia's Mill Village was the place to live and work. There were nicely painted houses, tree-lined streets, churches, 2 company stores, a streetcar line into town, and even a cemetery. Although living and working in the mills was a very different life, community members grew to love living in Olympia. Life here revolved around 3 things: going to church on Sundays, going to work on Mondays, and going to the community center anytime you could. Located at 701 Whaley, the community center boasted a swimming pool, bowling alley, basketball court, library, craft classes, and weekend movies and dances. Baseball and basketball teams, known as the Pacific Terrifics, competed with other Mill Village towns. The rivalry was quite often fierce. The sense of community grew as villagers gathered in neighbors' yards in the evenings for visiting, storytelling, and watching the children play chase or hide and seek. Some of the activities involved were fruit suppers, tater fries, and neighborhood sings. One of the final processes of turning cotton into fabric was the inspection. Mill workers used these tools to look for the flaws. If they found any that could not be corrected, they had to stop the roll and cut off a minimum of 5 feet of fabric before starting again. Those cutoffs were taken home by the mill workers and fashioned into all sorts of household items, like pillowcases, sheets, curtains, even children's clothing. This architectural closet shows examples of the actual construction of the Mill Village houses. The different floor plans ranged from single-story 3-room houses to 6-room 2-story styles. Indoor plumbing was not installed until the early 1920s, so every house was equipped with an outdoor privy, which was quite common during that time. Back porches provided storage and access. Front porches were perfect for sitting and rocking, which contributed greatly to the community atmosphere throughout the Mill Village. By the 1930s, families were large and multi-generational, making Mill Village kitchens very important because every other room in the house was used for bed space. When visitors came, they gathered in the kitchen where the chairs were. Here, visiting neighbors would enjoy sweet tea, coffee, or another beverage they concocted. Families who gathered here were very proud of the lives they had created, but they were adamantly against their children having to endure the same hard labor and long hours. The message to children was to not work in the mill, but to get an education, learn a trade, or go into the military. Just do not work in the mill. This room is also where the conversation would have turned to the unions. Workers were used to 5 12-hour shifts during the week and a half day on Saturdays. Throughout the 20s and 30s, conversations of forming a textile workers union circulated throughout the village. Although there would be dire consequences, the workers persisted in their efforts to get better pay, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. Finally, in 1938, the Olympia Mill was unionized. Now, this was a victory that provided protection for the workers who paid weekly union dues to finance the cause. The reduction in the number of hours worked and increased pay made it worthwhile. The Union Hall on Silver Street was built as a place for the union workers to gather. It is located just across the street from the mills. The exterior of the Union Hall resembles a fortress, symbolizing the protection of the workers by the union. It also stood to mark the antagonistic relationship that had begun to exist between workers and bosses. Infuriated mill owners sold the entire mill village to real estate investors, and all the perks of living in the mill housing were removed. Workers lost their inexpensive mill house rent and access to their beloved community center. When the houses were sold, higher rents were charged, which added to the workers' burdens. The 1940s represented another huge cultural shift for the textile workers. With the protection of the union, they were no longer under the thumb of the mill owners. They now had the power to strike for better working conditions. But union membership did come at a cost. The enjoyment they had at the community center no longer existed. So that's when people began to focus on Olympia High School. Not only was it their educational institution, but the school became the center of social, cultural, and athletic activities as well. School plays, concerts, pageants, and athletic events became the social hub of the community. When the mill houses were sold, the workers living in them had to negotiate new rents or take an opportunity to buy their home. A 3-room home could be bought for $250, with $45 down and payments of $3 a week. Home ownership marked the beginning of building generational wealth. When families could buy their own home, they began sinking deep roots. That is one of the reasons the Mill Village is almost sacred ground to people who grew up here.
off Pearl Harbor and the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes.
World War II demanded other changes. Many of the young men who went to war in Europe, Africa, or the Pacific Islands would not return to the Mill Village to go back to a job in the mills. They had learned trades, traveled the world, and had the GI Bill to enable them to go to college. Well, this was another huge turning point. All the things in this room represent this new vision, this new way of living more independently for people in the Mill Village. All these factors work together to bond many generations of mill workers into a community that endures to this day. This unique culture is on full display at the Olympia Mill Village Museum. Thank you for watching this tour. I'm Dawn D. Mercer-Plank. We hope your next visit is in person.